She has no idea the land is worth millions. That was my husband's voice. I know because I had been hearing it for 19 years, across breakfast tables, through hospital waiting rooms, during arguments about money, over Christmas mornings, and in the dark beside me when neither of us could sleep. But I had never heard Grant speak quite like that. Low, controlled, almost amused. The kind of voice a man uses when he believes the person he is talking about is nowhere close enough to hear him. I was standing barefoot inside our hotel room in Chattanooga, holding 2 glasses of wine, while Grant stood on the balcony with his back to the sliding glass door. It was our 19th anniversary. We were supposed to have dinner in 40 minutes. I had changed into the navy dress he always said made my eyes look greener, pinned my hair up, and poured the wine because for once I wanted an evening where neither of us talked about work. Then I heard him say it. She has no idea the land is worth millions. I stopped so suddenly that one glass tapped lightly against the other. Grant didn't turn around. Somewhere below us, music drifted up from the hotel courtyard. Cars moved along the street beyond the river. Inside the room, the air conditioner hummed like nothing important had happened. That's one thing nobody tells you about the moment your life changes. The world usually refuses to cooperate. There is no thunder, no dramatic silence. Somebody laughs in another room. An elevator opens down the hall. Your husband stands 10 feet away talking about you as if you are a problem he has already solved. I heard another piece of the conversation, quieter this time. She trusts me. Then a pause. I know. My fingers tightened around the wine stems. I didn't know who was on the other end. I didn't know what exactly Grant meant by millions. And I didn't know why the sentence made something cold move slowly through my chest. But I knew the land. Everyone in my family called it the Harper Place. 31 acres outside Franklin, Tennessee, left to me by my grandmother Evelyn 11 years earlier. If you enjoy stories about people who realize too late that they underestimated the wrong person, subscribe, because I didn't open that balcony door, I listened. My name is Natalie Mercer. I was 48 years old that night, and until then I would have described my marriage as solid. Not perfect. I don't trust people who call 19 years of marriage perfect. Perfect usually means someone is leaving out the parts that make it real. Grant and I had disagreements. We had months when work swallowed too much of us. We had nights where one person fell asleep angry and mornings where neither remembered why. But we had also survived my mother's illness, his father's death, 2 job changes, a bad financial year, and the 1,000 smaller disappointments that test a marriage more quietly than any single crisis. I believed we knew each other. That belief may have been the most dangerous thing I carried into Chattanooga. Familiarity gives you confidence. You stop studying someone because you think you have already learned them. You know how they take their coffee, which shoulder aches when the weather changes, which story they tell too often at parties. Eventually, knowing someone's habits can start feeling like knowing their character. They are not the same thing. I worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center south of Nashville. My days were spent with people rebuilding trust in their own bodies after strokes, surgeries, accidents, and illnesses that had changed the rules overnight. It is patient work. You learn that panic makes people move badly. Fear makes them compensate, and when something has been damaged, the first thing you do is understand the structure before you force weight onto it. I didn't know yet how much that lesson was going to matter in my own life. Grant was 52 and worked as a regional sales director for a commercial building materials company. He knew developers, contractors, architects, men who could look at an empty field and immediately imagine roads, parking lots, apartment buildings, retail space. He was good at his job because he understood what people wanted before they said it. I used to admire that about him. He could walk into a tense meeting and make everyone believe the idea they eventually accepted had somehow been theirs all along. At home, though, Grant had always been simpler, or at least I thought he had. I handled most of the family things. He handled investments and insurance. We were comfortable, but not flashy. I drove a 5-year-old Subaru Outback. Grant drove a leased SUV through work. We lived in a nice house without pretending it was a mansion. I bought my work shoes when they went on sale and reused gift bags until the handles finally tore off. Grant teased me about that. "You know we can afford another gift bag, Nat." "That's how they get you," I would say. He always laughed. The Harper Place was the one thing in my life that never felt connected to money. My grandparents bought the property before Franklin became the kind of place people from out of state searched online before deciding Tennessee might be their next new beginning. There was a white farmhouse near the road, an old barn with a roof that needed attention every few years, and what remained of a peach orchard my grandfather planted when my mother was still a child. I spent summers there. Grandma Evelyn taught me how to snap beans on the porch and how to tell when rain was coming by the way the leaves turned. Grandpa let me sit on the tractor beside him before my feet could reach anything useful. My mother married my father between two maple trees near the south field. When Grandma died, the property came to me through her estate. Grant had been beside me through all of it. He carried boxes out of her bedroom. He found me crying in the barn over an old coffee tin full of photographs and held me until I stopped apologizing for crying over things that had happened decades earlier. At the probate attorney's office, when I learned the land would pass directly to me, Grant squeezed my hand beneath the table and whispered, "She knew you'd take care of it." I believed him. Maybe he believed himself then, too. That is one of the hardest things about looking backward after betrayal. You want to divide the past neatly into real and fake, good and bad, truth and lie. Life rarely gives you that satisfaction. Sometimes a person can love you sincerely on Monday and make a selfish choice on Friday. Sometimes the lie does not erase everything before it. It just forces you to admit that the person you loved was capable of becoming someone you did not recognize. For years, I thought the Harper place was worth maybe $1 million, perhaps a little more as Franklin continued growing. I never bothered with a formal appraisal because I wasn't planning to sell it. Why would I need to know the exact market value of something I had already decided to keep? That was how I saw it. Land had two kinds of value to me: the number someone would pay for it and the number of memories you would lose if you let it go. Only one of those ever interested me. Looking back, I can see how Grant might have interpreted that differently. He understood markets. I understood attachment. And somewhere along the way, perhaps he started confusing my lack of interest in selling with a lack of understanding altogether. But that night in Chattanooga, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that my husband was standing outside discussing my land with someone I couldn't hear. I moved closer to the glass without touching it. Grant shifted his weight and lowered his voice. Most of the next sentence disappeared into the night air. I caught only fragments. "Don't push," then "she'll come around." My stomach tightened. He paused while the person on the phone spoke. Then he said the sentence that frightened me more than the first one. "I've known Natalie for 19 years. I know exactly how to handle this." Handle this. Not discuss it with me, not ask me, handle it. There are words that seem harmless until you realize you are the thing being handled. I stepped backward before he could turn around. I set both wine glasses on the table carefully and sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was beating hard now, but my thoughts had become strangely clear. I didn't know enough. That was the only fact I trusted. If I opened the door and demanded answers, Grant would immediately know what I had heard. He could explain, deny, minimize, change whatever plan existed, and I would be left trying to decide which version of the truth belonged to the man who had already been comfortable discussing me behind a closed door. So I did nothing. Or at least that was what Grant thought. I turned on the television, I picked up one of the wine glasses and took a sip. 2 minutes later, the balcony door slid open. Grant walked inside with his phone in his hand and the same relaxed expression I had seen 1,000 times before. He smiled when he saw me. "Sorry," he said, "work call." I looked at him for a moment longer than usual. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." He put the phone face down on the dresser. "Nothing important." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. Same lips, same cologne, same wedding ring brushing lightly against my shoulder. I smiled. "Good." He reached for his wine. "Ready for dinner?" "Almost." Grant turned toward the mirror to straighten his collar. I watched him from behind and understood something I had never needed to understand before. The most dangerous moment in a lie is not when you discover it. It is when the person telling it still believes you haven't. And as Grant lifted his glass and smiled at me, completely certain that our anniversary evening was continuing exactly as planned, I made one decision. I would not ask him what that phone call meant. Not yet. First, I was going to find out why my husband knew my land was worth millions when I didn't. Once I knew Grant had been talking about my land behind my back, the months before Chattanooga began replaying themselves differently. Memory is strange that way. Before you know the truth, a question is just a question. A pause is just a pause. Somebody standing in the wrong room holding the wrong folder is something you notice and then forget, because trust teaches you not to build a case against the person you love. Afterward, those same moments return carrying meanings they never had before. The first one came back to me almost immediately. It had been late May, a Saturday morning, warm enough that I had the kitchen windows open while I cut strawberries for breakfast. Grant walked in from the garage with 2 coffees and the newspaper tucked under his arm. He put my cup beside me, kissed my cheek, then leaned against the island. "You ever think about getting your grandmother's property appraised again?" he asked. I kept slicing. "Again? I've never had it formally appraised." "Exactly." I looked up. "Why?" He shrugged. "The area's changing fast. You might be surprised what it's worth." "I'm not selling it." "I didn't say you were." He took a strawberry from the bowl. "You can know what something's worth without selling it." At the time, that sounded reasonable. Grant spent his workdays around commercial construction and development. Property values were normal conversation for him. I teased him. "What, are you worried I'm secretly sitting on a gold mine?" He smiled. "Wouldn't be the worst problem to have." Then he changed the subject. That was all. Or at least that was all I thought it was. A week later, we were driving home from dinner in Brentwood when he asked what I paid in property taxes on the Harper land. I gave him the rough number. Then he asked whether the agricultural classification still covered the southern acreage. I turned toward him. "Since when do you know anything about the agricultural classification?" He kept his eyes on the road. "You've mentioned it." "Have I?" "Probably," he smiled. "Or maybe I looked at one of the tax bills. I don't remember." That bothered me for maybe 30 seconds, then life moved on. That is how warning signs survive inside good relationships. They rarely announce themselves loudly enough to compete with everything else. Dinner plans, work problems, laundry, parents getting older, a leaking faucet, a friend calling with bad news. Suspicion has to fight for space in an ordinary life, and most of the time trust wins because trust has history behind it. In June, Grant's questions became more specific. Was the deed still only in my name? Had Grandma left any restrictions on development? Did the parcel have recorded easements? Was there direct road access along the southern boundary? One evening, I was brushing my teeth while he stood beside me shaving, and I laughed through the toothpaste foam. "Should I be worried you're planning to become a farmer?" Grant grinned at me in the mirror. "Absolutely not." "Then why are you suddenly so interested in 31 acres you've ignored for 11 years? He rinsed his razor. "I haven't ignored it." "You've never asked me about easements in your life." "I'm getting older." "You're 52, Grant, not 90. He smiled. "Exactly. Old enough to start thinking ahead." He put down the razor and looked at me. "We've got assets scattered everywhere. Retirement accounts, investments, the house, your land. We should make sure everything is structured properly." "My land," I said automatically. The change in his face lasted only a second, a tiny pause. Then the warm husband returned. "Of course, your land. I just mean from an estate planning standpoint." I nodded because nothing he said was technically wrong. That became a pattern I only understood later. Grant rarely told lies that were completely false. He built them around enough truth that questioning them made you feel unreasonable. Yes, married couples should discuss estate planning. Yes, inherited properties should be protected. Yes, knowing what your assets are worth can be responsible. The danger was not always in what he said. It was in what he carefully left out. By July, he began talking about a family LLC. The first time was over Thai takeout at our kitchen table. "I was talking to somebody today about asset structures," he said casually. "A family LLC might actually make sense for the Harper property." I set down my fork. "Why would I need an LLC?" "Liability, succession, management. It gives you options." "What options do I need?" "You don't know what life will look like 10 years from now." "I know I don't want to sell Grandma's place." Grant lifted both hands slightly. "I'm not talking about selling." "Then what are you talking about?" "Protection." That word worked on me because he knew it would. Protecting the property was exactly what Grandma had trusted me to do. If something happened to you, he continued, we'd already have everything organized. No confusion, no unnecessary probate issues, no mess. It already passed through probate once. That doesn't mean it's structured perfectly now. He said perfectly gently, without pressure. I shook my head. Not yet. Grant smiled. Fine, forget I mentioned it. And just like that, the conversation was over. No fight, no sulking, no attempt to convince me. At the time, I took his lack of pressure as evidence that I had nothing to worry about. Now I understand, patience can be sincere, but it can also be tactical. People who need something from you do not always push harder when you resist. Sometimes they simply wait until resistance feels like your own idea. A few weeks later, I came home early because my last patient canceled. Grant's SUV was in the driveway, which surprised me because he had told me he would be in Murfreesboro until dinner. I walked inside and heard a drawer close in my home office. When I reached the doorway, Grant was standing beside the filing cabinet with a folder in one hand. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked up quickly. Not guilty exactly, just surprised. "Looking for the umbrella insurance policy." I pointed toward the desk. "It's in the top drawer." "Yeah, I found it." He put the folder back into the cabinet. I saw the label before it disappeared. Harper Property. My mother had written those words years earlier. "Why was that folder out?" Grant glanced at the cabinet. "I thought the policy might be with the land papers." "It isn't." "Clearly." He smiled, crossed the room, and kissed my cheek. "You're home early." That was it. He gave me a plausible explanation, and I accepted it, because the alternative would have required me to imagine something about my husband I had no reason to imagine. People like to believe they would recognize betrayal instantly. They picture themselves noticing a perfume they don't wear, a second phone, a suspicious charge, one obvious clue that would make everything clear. Most betrayal is not that considerate. It hides inside explanations that are almost good enough. It depends on your willingness to believe the person you built your life with is still behaving like the person you built it with. By August, Grant's interest seemed to fade. He stopped asking about easements, stopped mentioning the deed. For nearly 3 weeks, the Harper property never came up. I relaxed. I told myself I had been overthinking the filing cabinet. Then one evening we sat on the back deck while cicadas screamed in the trees and the Tennessee air hung heavy around us. Grant handed me iced tea and said, "I've been thinking about that LLC." I sighed. "I thought we buried that." "We did. I'm not pushing." "Sounds a little like pushing." He laughed softly. "Then don't do anything. I just want you to understand why I brought it up." "I understand. You think it protects the property." "Exactly." He looked out toward the yard. "And it could make things easier if opportunities ever come up." That word caught me. What opportunities? Leasing, easements, maybe somebody wants access. Maybe one day a developer offers something ridiculous. "I don't want development out there. Today." I turned toward him. "What does that mean?" Grant looked back at me and smiled as if I had misunderstood. "It means none of us knows what we'll want 10 years from now. I know what I want now, and that's all that matters." He touched my knee. "I'm on your side, Nat." I remember the warmth of his hand. I remember believing him. 4 days later, we drove to Chattanooga for our anniversary. Grant booked the hotel himself, made the dinner reservation, even promised he would keep work calls to a minimum. The first day was good. That is another detail I refuse to rewrite just because I know what came next. We walked along the river, we laughed over lunch. Grant bought me a ridiculous chocolate dessert I said I didn't want and then ate half of mine anyway. For several hours, he was exactly the man I had believed him to be. Maybe that version was still real in some way. People are rarely only one thing, which is what makes betrayal so much harder than simple villainy. If Grant had been cruel for 19 years, leaving him would have been easy. He had been kind often enough that the truth had somewhere deep to cut. The second evening, while I was getting ready for dinner, Grant stepped onto the balcony to take a call. I poured 2 glasses of wine and walked toward the sliding door. I was about to open it when I heard him say, "She has no idea the land is worth millions." I stopped. Grant's back was to me. He listened to whoever was on the other end, then said, "She trusts me." The name came a few seconds later, quiet, but clear enough that I heard it. "Vanessa, I know." My hand tightened around the stem of the glass. Vanessa! I had never heard Grant mention a Vanessa. He paced farther along the balcony, lowering his voice, and I moved closer to the glass. "Don't rush her," he said. "If I push, Natalie digs in. I know how she thinks." Another pause, then a sentence that made every strange conversation from the previous 4 months line up in my mind at once. "Once she believes the LLC is about protecting the property, she'll come around." I stood there in my anniversary dress, 3 feet away from the man I had trusted for 19 years, and finally understood that all those harmless questions had never been harmless at all. I stood behind that hotel balcony door and listened to my husband plan a future that apparently included my land, my signature, and everybody except me. "Vanessa, trust me," Grant said again, his voice low enough that he probably thought the glass between us swallowed the words. "She still thinks the property is worth maybe 1.5, 2 tops." My heartbeat had become so loud I was afraid he would hear it through the door. There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind catches up. Your hands go cold, your mouth dries out, your hearing gets strangely sharp, as if every sound in the room has been turned up except your own breathing. I remember the ice machine humming somewhere down the hallway. I remember a motorcycle passing on the street below. I remember looking at Grant's wedding ring through the glass and thinking how absurdly normal it looked on his hand. Then he said, "The new numbers are closer to 10. 10. I almost convinced myself I had heard him wrong. 10 what? 10 acres? 10 offers? 10,000? But Grant kept talking. 9.6 on the conservative side, over 11 if the commercial access gets approved. I gripped the back of the chair beside me. 31 acres my grandmother had left me. Land I had always treated as something valuable in the emotional sense, not something that belonged in conversations involving 8 figures. I had never ordered an appraisal. I had never called a developer, and yet my husband apparently knew exactly what it was worth. More importantly, he had deliberately made sure I did not. Vanessa said something I couldn't hear, and Grant gave a little laugh. Not a nervous laugh, a comfortable one. "No, she won't shop it around. That's the whole point. Natalie doesn't think like that." Something about the way he said my name hurt more than the numbers. It wasn't affection, it was analysis. He was describing me like a weakness in a contract. "She gets sentimental about that place," he continued. "Her grandmother, family history, all of that. So I'm framing the LLC as protection, something that keeps the property in the family." I shut my eyes. That sentence took me back to our kitchen table in July, Grant explaining how a family LLC could protect Grandma's land. He had even reached across the table and told me he understood why I was emotional about it. At the time, I had thought that was love. Now I was hearing the backstage version. There is something uniquely cruel about finding out a person has been taking notes on your tenderness. We tell people we love where we are soft because we assume they will protect those places. You never imagine they are learning where to press. Grant paced farther down the balcony. I could see only part of his reflection now. "I'm telling you, once I get her signature, we can lock the option before January. She doesn't need every detail yet." Another pause. "Because if she knows what Cumberland is willing to pay, she'll freeze." Cumberland. I stored the word immediately. Vanessa, Cumberland, 9/6/11, January, LLC. I repeated them silently because I didn't know how long I would have before Grant came back inside, and suddenly every word mattered. Vanessa spoke again. Grant lowered his voice even more, but I caught enough. "The consulting payment happens after closing." My stomach tightened. "Yes, 1.35. That's what we agreed." $1.35 million. The thought landed slowly because my brain was still resisting what the evidence was already telling me. My husband wasn't merely considering selling my property without fully informing me. Someone had promised him more than $1 million if I signed the right papers. I wanted to step through that door. God, I wanted to. I pictured myself sliding it open and watching his face when he realized I had heard everything. I imagined saying Vanessa's name, asking about Cumberland. Asking him why a man who had shared my bed for 19 years thought my trust was something he could convert into a consulting fee. For maybe 5 seconds, anger made confrontation feel like power. Then the therapist in me took over. I spend my life around injuries. When someone walks into my clinic after tearing something badly, panic tells them to test it, push push on it, see how damaged it really is. But sometimes the worst thing you can do is move before you understand what is holding what together. Grant believed I knew nothing. That was the only advantage I had, and anger was asking me to throw it away for the temporary pleasure of watching him panic. So I stayed where I was. "She'll sign," he said. "She trusts me." Those 3 words settled the decision. I stepped away from the door as quietly as I could. I took the 2 wine glasses to the bathroom. My hands were shaking now, finally. I poured mine into the sink because I knew I needed my head clear, rinsed the glass, filled it halfway with water, then walked back into the room and turned on the television. Some home renovation show came on. A smiling couple was knocking down a kitchen wall while cheerful music played underneath. I almost laughed. Apparently, even the universe had a sense of irony. I sat on the edge of the bed, picked up my phone, and opened a blank note. Vanessa Cumberland, 9.6 to 11+, January, LLC, 1.35 after closing. I saved it inside an old grocery list folder because it was the first place Grant would never think to look. Then I deleted the screen from my recent apps. Less than 2 minutes later, the balcony door opened. Grant came inside, rubbing his hands together from the cool night air. "Sorry about that." He looked at the television. "What are you watching?" "No idea," I said. "Apparently, they hate walls." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Sounds like every HGTV show." He sat beside me and reached for his wine. I studied him without appearing to study him. 19 years gives you a map of somebody's face. I knew the crease that appeared when Grant was worried about money. I knew how his left eyebrow lifted when he was exaggerating. I knew he rubbed his thumb against the side of his index finger when he was hiding irritation. That night I saw none of those things. He was relaxed, which meant lying to me no longer made him nervous. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just Mark." He took a sip. "Apparently one of our clients is threatening to push a delivery schedule." Mark. Not Vanessa, not Cumberland, not millions, just Mark and a delivery problem. Sounds annoying. It is, but it can wait until Monday. He leaned over and kissed my temple. "Tonight is ours." I don't know why that sentence nearly broke me. Maybe because part of me still wanted him to be the man I thought he was. That's what people misunderstand about betrayal. The truth can arrive all at once, but love usually doesn't leave that way. Love has inertia. It keeps moving after the engine has been destroyed. You can know someone betrayed you and still remember the version of them who held your mother's hand in the hospital or drove through a storm because your tire blew out. The heart is embarrassingly slow to update its records. Grant stood and checked his watch. "Reservation in 40 minutes. You ready?" "Almost." I went into the bathroom and closed the door. For a few seconds, I just stared at myself in the mirror. 48 years old. Hair pinned up for an anniversary dinner, small gold earrings Grant had given me on our 10th anniversary. I looked exactly like the wife he expected to see. I decided that was useful. I washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. Then I walked back out and smiled. We went to dinner. Grant ordered bourbon. I ordered sparkling water and told him the wine had given me a headache. We talked about work. We talked about whether we should repaint the guest room. He told an old story about our first apartment and made me laugh despite myself, which somehow made everything worse. At one point, he reached across the table and held my hand. I let him. Not because I had forgiven anything, because I needed to understand how far the lie went. And sometimes the only way to learn the truth is to stop letting people know where your questions are. When Grant fell asleep that night, I stayed awake beside him, staring at the faint strip of city light beneath the curtains. I repeated the names and numbers until I knew I would never forget them. Vanessa, Cumberland, 9.6, 11, 1.35, January. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, I understood the first thing I needed to do when we got home. I wasn't going to ask my husband for an explanation. I wasn't going to call my sister and cry. I wasn't even going to find out who Vanessa was yet. First, I needed to make sure that whatever Grant Mercer thought he was about to sell was still mine when I finally decided to ask questions. The first thing I did Monday morning was go to work. That sounds strange even now, but routine can be a kind of camouflage, and I needed Grant to believe nothing had changed. I left the house at 6:40, carrying my usual travel mug, kissed him goodbye in the kitchen, and listened while he complained about a supplier meeting as if I hadn't spent the previous night memorizing the numbers attached to his betrayal. By 8 o'clock, I was helping a 67-year-old man relearn how to put weight on a repaired hip. By 9:30, I was showing a woman half my age how to walk downstairs without protecting a knee that no longer needed protection. I smiled, I encouraged, I wrote progress notes, and all morning one thought kept returning. Before I learned who Vanessa was, before I learned what Cumberland meant, before I asked Grant a single question, I needed to know exactly what he could and could not do with my land. Fear becomes manageable the moment it turns into a list. At lunch, I sat in my car behind the rehabilitation center and called Eleanor Price. I had met Eleanor 11 years earlier after Grandma died. She was an estate and property attorney in Brentwood, mid-60s, silver hair cut just below her ears, and one of those women who never filled silence just because other people found it uncomfortable. My mother trusted her, which was enough for me. Her assistant recognized my name and put me through. "Natalie Mercer," Eleanor said. "It's been a while. I need to ask you something about the Harper property." There was a small pause. "All right, and I need this conversation to stay completely between us." The warmth disappeared from her voice, replaced by something more precise. "Is Grant involved?" That question almost made me laugh. Lawyers learn where trouble lives. Possibly. "Come in at 4. I hesitated. "Can you tell me one thing now? Try me." I lowered my voice, even though I was alone. "If land was inherited directly by me, and the deed has never changed, can my husband sell it without my signature?" "Generally, no. But Natalie, that answer depends on what you've signed since inheriting it." My stomach tightened. "I haven't signed anything." "Power of attorney?" "No." "Option agreement?" "No." "LLC documents?" "No." "Any loan using the property as collateral?" "Absolutely not." Her answer came immediately. "Then don't sign anything Grant gives you. Not one page. Not even something he says is preliminary. Bring me every document you have and we'll look at the title history." I went back inside and finished my day, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't safe yet, but I was no longer helpless. Those are not the same thing. People confuse control with certainty. I had neither, but I had direction, and direction is enough to keep panic from making decisions for you. At 3:20, I told my supervisor I had a family legal appointment and left early. I drove to the farmhouse first. I hadn't planned to. My hands just turned the wheel that way. The sky was gray, one of those early fall afternoons when Tennessee looks washed clean and tired. I parked beside the old barn and sat there for a minute with the engine running. Then I walked to the farmhouse, unlocked the side door, and went into Grandma's old kitchen. The room smelled faintly of wood, dust, and the lemon oil I used on the cabinets every few months. Nothing in that house knew what Grant was doing. The table was still scarred where Grandpa once dropped a cast iron skillet. The height marks my mother made for me were still penciled inside the pantry door. 31 acres, 9.6 million, maybe 11. Those numbers felt ridiculous in that kitchen. Money has a way of trying to rename things. A porch becomes square footage. A field becomes development potential. A tree line becomes road access. I understood why people sold land. Life changes. Families need money. Children move away. But hearing Grant reduce my grandmother's home to an asset he could quietly position for sale made me realize there are forms of theft that happen before anything is legally taken. Sometimes the first thing stolen is your right to understand what someone is planning to do with what belongs to you. I gathered the deed, probate papers, old survey, tax records, and the folder I had caught Grant holding weeks earlier. Then I drove to Eleanor's office. She read while I talked. I told her about Chattanooga, Vanessa, Cumberland, the values Grant quoted, the consulting payment, the LLC, everything. Eleanor never interrupted until I finished. Then she removed her glasses and said, "Tell me the exact phrase he used about the land value." "She has no idea the land is worth millions." Eleanor leaned back. "And he referenced a specific range?" 9.6 on the conservative side, more than 11 if commercial access gets approved. That isn't casual market knowledge. That's what I thought. Someone has done serious due diligence. She turned to her computer and pulled up county records. For the next 20 minutes, she searched quietly. I watched her face change before she said anything. There have been multiple inquiries tied to parcels around yours over the last 2 months. By who? The records don't tell me motive, but there's been survey activity, planning research, access inquiries, and this, she pointed at the screen, a zoning consultation involving property directly adjacent to yours. My mouth went dry. Can Grant order an appraisal on land he doesn't own? He can pay someone to estimate value. That doesn't give him ownership. Could he do any of this legally without telling me? Eleanor folded her hands. Researching property is not the same as transferring it. The dangerous part starts if you give him authority. I looked down at the Harper folder. Then I don't want him to ever have it. Eleanor studied me carefully. Are you asking me to protect the property from your husband? There are sentences that make a situation real because you finally have to answer them out loud. I thought about Grant pouring wine in Chattanooga, Grant kissing my head after lying about Mark, Grant telling Vanessa that I trusted him. Yes, I said, I am. Eleanor nodded once. No pity. I appreciated that more than I can explain. Pity can make you feel smaller at exactly the moment you need to remember your size. Then we protect the property first, she said. You can decide what to do about the marriage after you know your asset is secure. Over the next 10 days, we moved carefully. Eleanor brought in a tax attorney and a trust specialist. We created a separate property trust designed specifically around the inherited acreage, then placed ownership through a landholding LLC under that structure. I remained the controlling party. No spouse could acquire voting rights through marriage. No transfer, sale, mortgage, option, management agreement, or membership change could happen without my direct authorization and independent review. Eleanor was meticulous to the point of irritation, which was exactly what I wanted. Every page was checked twice. Every signature was witnessed. Every filing was recorded. Grant noticed none of it. I kept cooking dinner. I kept asking about his day. I even listened one night while he spent 15 minutes explaining a problem with concrete pricing, and I remember thinking how strange it is to hear someone discuss honesty in business while secretly planning to profit from deceiving his wife. The final documents were recorded on a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor called me into her office, placed the stamped copies in front of me, and tapped the first page with one finger. As of today, nobody does anything with that property unless you authorize it. I stared at the county seal. I expected relief. What I felt instead was sadness. I had just spent thousands of dollars protecting myself from the person who was supposed to be standing beside me protecting what mattered. Eleanor seemed to understand. Natalie, she said quietly, the land is safe now. I nodded. Good. She waited. So what happens next? I looked out her office window at the traffic moving along the road below. Now I find out what he was planning. Eleanor held my gaze for a moment. Then she picked up a yellow legal pad. In that case, she said, we stop looking at your property and start looking at your husband. Eleanor gave me Marcus Reed's number on a Friday afternoon and told me only 2 things about him. First, he had spent 17 years investigating financial fraud before leaving government work and opening a private firm in Nashville. Second, if he told me something was true, it was because he could prove it. At that point, proof was exactly what I needed. Suspicion can consume a person because it has no edges. It spreads into everything. Every late meeting becomes suspicious. Every password change becomes suspicious. Every unfamiliar receipt starts carrying more weight than it should. I didn't want to spend the next 6 months turning myself into a detective inside my own marriage. I wanted facts. So I called Marcus from the parking lot outside Eleanor's office. His voice was calm, almost flat. "What do you know for certain?" he asked. I liked the question because it forced me to separate what I felt from what I could actually defend. My husband has been trying to convince me to put 31 acres I inherited into a family LLC. I overheard him telling a woman named Vanessa that I don't know what the land is worth. He quoted numbers between 9.6 and 11 million. He mentioned something called Cumberland, an option before January, and a payment of 1.35 after closing. Marcus was silent for several seconds. Anything else? He said she trusts me. I heard him writing. And you do? I looked through the windshield at people moving in and out of the office building. I did. Marcus didn't comment on that. Professionals who deal with betrayal for a living probably learn not to waste words where they can't repair anything. Send me your husband's full name, employer, business email if you have it, the property address, and everything you remember about the call. Don't confront him. Don't access anything you're not legally allowed to access. And don't start changing your behavior. Why? Because people become careful when they know someone is watching. I almost smiled. That part I've already figured out. For the next 8 days, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was Natalie Mercer, physical therapist, wife of 19 years, woman who made chicken soup on Sunday because Grant said he felt a cold coming on. In the other, I was waiting for a stranger to tell me whether my husband had spent months building a financial trap around me. Grant seemed happier than usual. That bothered me more than anger would have. He brought home flowers on Tuesday. Not roses, nothing dramatic, just a grocery store bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus because he knew I liked them. He stood in the kitchen holding them out with that familiar half smile. No reason, he said. I took them. Those are usually the best reasons. He kissed me. I put the flowers in a blue ceramic pitcher my mother gave me and wondered whether guilt had bought them or confidence. That is another ugly thing betrayal does. It reaches backward and contaminates kindness. You stop knowing which moments were real and which ones were maintenance. Maybe Grant did love me in some way. Maybe he loved me and still believed he deserved what was mine. People want morality to be tidy, but human beings are capable of affection and selfishness in the same breath. A man can remember your coffee order and still build a plan that depends on your ignorance. By Wednesday, Grant was talking about the LLC again. Not pushing, never pushing. I found a couple examples of how families structure inherited property, he said while loading the dishwasher. I can show you whenever you're ready. Maybe next week. He nodded. No rush. That phrase almost made me laugh. No rush. Somewhere in his private conversations, there was a deadline before January, but to me, there was no rush. Thursday passed. Friday passed. Saturday morning, Grant drove to a golf outing with 2 clients. I went to the farmhouse and walked the southern boundary alone. The leaves had begun turning, and the grass was high along the old fence line. I tried to look at the land the way Grant apparently did. Access, frontage, acreage, development potential, money. I couldn't. I kept seeing Grandma standing near the orchard with gardening gloves tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. I kept hearing Grandpa's tractor. That's when I understood something I hadn't been able to put into words before. Grant's advantage was never that he knew more about real estate than I did. His advantage was that he believed sentiment made me weak. He thought loving something meant I couldn't understand its value. People make that mistake about women all the time. They confuse attachment with ignorance, kindness with passivity, patience with permission. At 10:14 Monday morning, Marcus texted me 3 words, "Can you meet?" I told my supervisor I needed an extended lunch and drove to his office near Music Row. Marcus was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, dressed like a man who had spent years trying not to be remembered by witnesses. His office was smaller than I expected. No dramatic wall of photographs, no corkboard with red strings, just a desk, 2 chairs, a locked filing cabinet, and a thick folder with my name written across the tab. He didn't offer coffee. He opened the folder. "Vanessa Cole," he said. He slid a profile toward me. 42 years old, commercial acquisitions consultant, Nashville address, independent firm called Cole Strategic Acquisitions. "She doesn't work for your husband?" Marcus said. "She works with developers who want difficult parcels." "Difficult how?" "Owners who don't want to sell. Properties where direct contact might drive up the asking price. Situations where someone needs access before the owner understands the full value." My skin went cold. "So she finds land?" "She finds leverage." Marcus turned another page. "Now Cumberland." The name at the top read Cumberland Ridge Holdings, LLC, formed 11 months earlier, registered through an attorney in Nashville. On paper, nothing connected Grant directly to ownership. Then why does he care? I asked. Marcus tapped one of the documents. Because Cumberland Ridge is tied to a development group assembling approximately 200 acres along the southern corridor outside Franklin. They've secured options on several parcels. Your property sits directly between two sections they need for access and continuity. I stared at the map. My 31 acres were highlighted in yellow. On either side, large sections were marked in blue. I didn't need to understand development to see what it meant. I'm the gap. You're more than the gap, Marcus said. You're the cleanest access point. He showed me planning documents, road projections, and a private market analysis. Their internal estimate for your parcel is $9.85 million if they can secure it before the next zoning phase. There it was. Not a vague number whispered on a balcony, a number printed on paper. $9,850,000. I sat back. I've been paying taxes on that land for 11 years, thinking it was worth maybe 1.5. That doesn't mean you were foolish. This value depends on what they're assembling around you. Your husband knew because someone showed him the larger picture. Marcus pulled out another document. And this is where it gets interesting. It was a consulting agreement between Cumberland Ridge and a small company called Mercer Development Advisory. I read the name twice. Grant doesn't have a company called that. Not publicly in the way you'd recognize. It was organized through a registered agent 4 months ago. My throat tightened. He owns it? Indirectly, but yes, I can connect him to the controlling interest. Marcus pointed to the compensation section. Acquisition completion fee, $1,350,000, payable upon execution and closing of the target parcel arrangement. I felt something inside me go quiet again. My land. Your land. He gets $1.35 million if I sign, if the transaction closes under the structure they're proposing. I thought about every conversation in our kitchen. Protect the family, make things easier, think long term. Suddenly the words looked cheap. Grant had not been advising his wife, he had been working a deal. So the LLC he wants me to create, I said, would potentially give him enough management authority to facilitate an option or negotiated transfer, depending on the final operating agreement? Marcus leaned forward. That's why Eleanor told you not to sign anything. The land itself is safe now, but before you restructured it, the right document could have created a serious problem. I stared at the consulting agreement until the numbers blurred. $1.35 million. I tried to imagine what amount of money makes a person decide 19 years of trust is negotiable. Then I realized that was the wrong question. Money doesn't create character. It reveals the terms that were already there. Marcus closed part of the folder, but not all of it. Natalie, there's something else. I looked at him. His expression had changed. Until then, he had been discussing companies, parcels, filings, numbers. Now he looked almost reluctant. What? He placed his hand on the last section of the folder. Vanessa Cole isn't only involved in the land deal. I knew before he opened it. I don't know how, maybe because there are truths your body recognizes before your mind will let you say them. Marcus pulled the final stack free and placed 6 photographs face down between us. You need to decide whether you want to see this. I looked at his hand, then at the photographs. Turn them over. Marcus turned the photographs over one at a time. The first showed Grant and Vanessa leaving a restaurant in downtown Nashville just after 10 at night. His hand was on the small of her back, not the polite kind of touch you give a colleague while guiding them through a doorway. I knew that hand. I knew exactly how Grant touched someone when affection was involved, because for 19 years I had been the woman beneath it. The second photograph was outside a hotel in Louisville. Grant wore the charcoal jacket I had helped him choose before what he told me was a regional sales conference. Vanessa stood close enough that there was no room left for interpretation. The third was worse. They were kissing beside her car in a parking garage. I didn't cry. I wish I could tell you that was because I was strong, but sometimes shock simply arrives before grief has found the address. I sat there looking at my husband kissing another woman and thought about the dry cleaning receipt I had picked up for that jacket 2 days later. That was the detail my mind chose. Not the kiss, not the betrayal, a dry cleaning receipt. People imagine heartbreak as this dramatic collapse, But the mind often protects itself by grabbing onto ordinary things: the coffee cup on the desk, the sound of traffic outside, the tiny scratch on a photograph, anything easier to understand than the fact that the person you trusted has been living a second life while asking what you wanted for dinner. Marcus gave me time. He didn't say he was sorry. I was grateful for that. Sorry is a word people offer when they need to fill the silence around somebody else's pain. I turned over the fourth photograph myself. Atlanta, a hotel entrance, date stamped 6 months earlier. Grant had called me from that trip and told me he was exhausted because his client kept changing specifications. I remembered sitting on our bed while he spoke, folding laundry with the phone tucked between my shoulder and ear. He had told me he missed me. I had said I missed him too. The fifth photograph showed them outside Vanessa's condo in the Gulch. The sixth was taken only 3 weeks before our anniversary trip. Grant was carrying overnight bags. One was his. I recognized it because I had given it to him for Christmas. I pushed the photographs back toward Marcus. How long? What I can document with confidence? 13 months. 13 months. I did the math automatically. 13 birthdays, holidays, ordinary dinners, Sunday mornings. Not 13 years, of course, but when betrayal is measured in time, the mind starts counting everything that happened inside it. Last Thanksgiving, Grant carved the turkey while my sister teased him about burning the rolls. Christmas morning, he gave me a bracelet and watched my face while I opened it. In February, when I got the flu, he brought me soup upstairs and checked my temperature twice in the middle of the night. In April, we stood together at a neighbor's wedding and danced to a song we used to love. All of those moments now existed beside something I had not known. That is what betrayal really changes. It doesn't just wound the present, it rewrites the past. Was she involved with him before the land? I asked. Marcus rested his hands on the folder. I can't prove when the relationship became romantic. What I can prove is that her involvement with Cumberland and her relationship with Grant overlap for at least 11 months. So maybe the affair came first, maybe, or maybe the property did, also possible. I hated that answer because both possibilities were ugly in different ways. If the affair came first, Grant had betrayed our marriage and then realized his mistress could profit from my land. If the land came first, then Vanessa may have entered his life as part of the deal and become something else along the way. Either way, my marriage had become useful to them. Marcus opened another section. There's more. Of course there was. By then I had learned that sentence never brings good news. He slid several printed emails across the desk. They weren't personal messages between Grant and Vanessa. Marcus had obtained them through legally accessible business records tied to the project and communications disclosed through corporate channels. Vanessa wrote about owner resistance, emotional attachment, and transition strategy. At first, the language seemed cold but ordinary, the sort of vocabulary consultants use when they want people to sound like problems on a spreadsheet. Then I saw my name, Natalie Mercer, primary owner. Beneath it was a note: strong sentimental attachment to inherited property, resistant to direct sale discussion. Spouse has established influence. Recommend family protection framing rather than development value framing. I read it twice. Spouse has established influence. That was me reduced to a line item. My marriage converted into leverage. Marcus pointed to another page. Vanessa had written to Grant. If Natalie gets emotional about the family history, keep positioning the LLC as preservation. She needs to believe the structure protects Evelyn's legacy. Evelyn, my grandmother's name. I stopped breathing for a second. How does she know my grandmother's name? Marcus didn't answer, because he didn't need to. Grant knew. Grant had told her. He had taken the stories I shared with my husband, the farmhouse, the orchard, Grandma's death, the promise I made to keep the property safe, and handed them to another woman as instructions for how to manipulate me. The affair suddenly seemed almost smaller. I know that sounds strange. Another woman touching my husband should have been the deepest cut. But marriage is more than sexual loyalty. It is custody of each other's private truths. You learn which memory can still make your spouse cry 20 years later. You know which insecurity they joke about, because admitting it hurts would be harder. You know where they are fragile. The great privilege of intimacy is being trusted with information you could use to destroy somebody and choosing never to use it. Grant had made the opposite choice. He had given Vanessa the map. I looked at Marcus. Did Grant respond to this? He handed me another page. One sentence was highlighted. I know how to handle Nat. She'll fight a sale, but she'll sign something if she thinks it keeps the property in the family. I felt heat rise behind my eyes then, finally. Not tears yet. Anger. Quiet, clean anger. Grant didn't call me stupid. He didn't have to. He believed he understood me well enough to steer me around my own judgment. There is a particular arrogance in deciding that someone's trust means they have surrendered the right to make informed choices. If you're listening from somewhere outside the U.S., tell me what country you're in. And if you've ever had someone use something personal you trusted them with against you, you already know why this part hurt more than the affair. I kept reading. There were notes about timing, Thanksgiving as a possible deadline, January for the option, a suggestion that Grant introduced Vanessa to me eventually as a neutral property consultant after I became comfortable with the LLC idea. They had built stages. First Grant softened me, then the paperwork, then Vanessa, then the option, then the sale, then his $1.35 million fee. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They planned me. Marcus gave a small nod. That's one way to describe it. No, that's exactly what they did. I touched the edge of the folder. They planned how I would react before I ever knew there was something to react to. Marcus studied me. What do you want to do? The obvious answer was confront Grant that night, put the photographs on our kitchen table, ask how he could do this, demand a confession, call Vanessa, file for divorce. Rage has a schedule of its own, and it usually wants everything now. But then I remembered Chattanooga, Grant standing on that balcony, comfortable because he believed I had no idea. That ignorance was no longer mine, it was his. He didn't know the land was protected. He didn't know I knew about Cumberland. He didn't know I knew about the consulting fee. And he certainly didn't know I had seen photographs of him kissing Vanessa. For the first time since this began, the imbalance had reversed completely. Grant thought he was managing information. In reality, he was the only person in the marriage who no longer understood the situation. I gathered the photographs into one neat stack. I'm not confronting him. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Not yet? Not until he can't explain his way out of it. What are you thinking? I looked at Grant's highlighted sentence again. She'll sign something if she thinks it keeps the property in the family. Then I smiled, though there was nothing happy in it. He wants me to believe the LLC is a good idea. Marcus waited. So I'm going to let him think he convinced me. That evening I drove home before Grant did. I changed clothes, tied my hair back, and started dinner. Salmon, roasted potatoes, green beans. Ordinary food for an ordinary Monday. Grant walked through the door at 6:18, kissed my cheek, and asked how my day had been. Long, I said. Yours? Same. He loosened his tie and poured himself water. I watched him move around the kitchen and wondered how many times Vanessa had stood close enough to know that little scar beside his thumb. Then I looked away before my face betrayed me. Halfway through dinner, I set down my fork. I've been thinking about what you said. Grant glanced up. About what? The land. I gave him a small shrug. Maybe I've been too sentimental about the structure. If an LLC really protects Grandma's property, maybe we should look at it. Grant froze for less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Then his face softened into the careful smile of a man watching a locked door open. Really? Really? He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Nat, I think that's smart. I looked down at his hand over mine. 19 years together, 13 months of lies, 31 acres, $10 million, 1.35 million reasons for him to keep pretending. I smiled back. Then show me what you had in mind. Grant squeezed my fingers. He thought that was the moment his plan finally started working. What he didn't know was that it had just ended. The next morning, Grant had a folder waiting beside my coffee cup. That was how quickly he moved once he believed I had finally stepped onto the path he had been building for me. I came downstairs at 6:15, wearing my work clothes, hair still damp from the shower, and found him at the kitchen island with his laptop open and that same expression he wore whenever he thought a deal was beginning to come together. "I pulled a few things for you," he said, tapping the folder. I looked at it but didn't reach for it right away. "Already?" He smiled. "You said you wanted to understand it." "I do." I poured coffee slowly, added cream, then sat across from him. Inside the folder were articles about family LLCs, asset protection, estate planning, tax efficiencies. Nothing alarming. Nothing that said, "Give your husband control of $10 million" in bold letters across the top. That was the cleverness of it. Bad decisions rarely arrive wearing warning signs. They usually arrive dressed as something responsible. Grant had highlighted phrases in yellow. Protect inherited assets. Simplify succession. Preserve family property. I almost admired the precision. Every phrase had been chosen for me. "See," he said, "this is what I've been talking about. It doesn't mean selling. It doesn't mean changing what the property is. It just gives us flexibility." Us. There was that word again. Before Chattanooga, I had heard partnership in it. Now I heard access. "And I would still own it?" I asked. "Of course." His answer came immediately. Too immediately. Nothing changes in any meaningful way. I looked down at the documents like I was trying to follow. "Then why do we need an LLC?" Grant leaned forward, patient, almost tender. "Because ownership and management are two different things. Right now, everything is tied directly to you. If something happened, it could get messy. With a structure, we can make decisions efficiently." "We?" I asked again, softer this time. He didn't flinch. "You and me, we're married, Nat." I smiled. "I'm aware." He laughed and reached across the island to touch my wrist. I let him. That became my role over the next 2 weeks, the wife he needed me to be. Curious, cautious, sentimental enough to require reassurance, but slowly becoming convinced. It was harder than I expected, not because I wanted to expose him, because pretending normal intimacy after you know the truth feels like performing in a play where only one actor has read the final scene. Grant would kiss me goodbye, and I would smell his cologne and wonder whether Vanessa liked it. He would text me at lunch, "Love you, crazy day," and I would stare at those words wondering when exactly a lie becomes routine enough that the person telling it stops feeling the weight. I answered anyway, "Love you too." That one hurt. There are people who think deception is easy once you know you're doing it. It isn't. When you still have feelings for someone, every false normal moment costs something. I wasn't enjoying the game. I was surviving it long enough to understand the whole board. Grant began feeding me information gradually. On Wednesday evening, while we were folding laundry, he mentioned that an LLC could make it easier to lease part of the acreage someday. Thursday, while we ate leftovers, he talked about liability if someone got injured on the property. Saturday morning, he casually brought up development rights. Not that we'd ever do anything major, he said, but if somebody wanted an easement or access, we should be positioned to negotiate. I folded one of his dress shirts and placed it in a neat stack. Access for what? Could be anything. Utilities, road improvements, neighboring parcels. My eyes stayed on the shirt. Would that be worth much? He gave a small shrug. Depends. I nearly smiled. 9.6 million on the conservative side? Over 11 if commercial access got approved. Depends. You know more about this than I do, I said. Grant softened instantly. That sentence was exactly what he wanted from me. That's why I'm trying to help. I looked up and gave him a grateful smile. I know. He believed it. That was the frightening part. Not that Grant could lie well. It was that he had built such a complete version of me in his head that anything I did inside that version confirmed his certainty. He believed I was sentimental. True. He believed I trusted him. Once true. He believed those two things meant I could be managed. That was his mistake. People often confuse knowing someone's habits with knowing their limits. Grant knew I avoided unnecessary conflict. He knew I gave people second chances. He knew I hated making scenes in public. What he did not know was what happened when I stopped feeling safe. At work, I see it in patients all the time. A body can compensate for weakness for months. It shifts weight, changes movement, protects one side without conscious thought. Then one day the compensation stops working and the whole system has to reorganize. That was me. For 19 years my marriage had taught me to lean toward Grant. Now, without him realizing it, I had shifted my weight away. Eleanor and Marcus knew what I was doing. Eleanor hated the risk of letting Grant continue talking paperwork, but she understood why I needed him comfortable. "Do not sign anything," she reminded me every time we spoke. "Not an acknowledgement, not a draft, not something he says is non-binding." I won't. Marcus was more interested in what Grant revealed once he thought I was cooperating. "Does he mention Cumberland?" "Not yet." "Vanessa?" "No." "Then he's still separating the pieces." "For now." Marcus paused. "He may test you." He was right. The test came the following Tuesday. Grant came home carrying takeout and a thin packet of documents. He placed them on the kitchen island while I unpacked dinner. "I had someone draft a sample operating agreement," he said. I didn't turn around. "Someone?" "A corporate attorney we use sometimes." "You hired an attorney?" "Not hired. He owed me a favor." I arranged containers on the counter. "Grant, I thought we were just learning." "We are. This is just so you can see what it might look like." I wiped my hands and finally picked up the packet. Mercer Family Holdings, LLC. My name appeared first. Grant's appeared second. 51% membership interest to me, 49% to him. At first glance, it looked reassuring. I still had the majority. Then I remembered what Eleanor had taught me. Percentages are not the same as authority. I flipped another page. Management decisions relating to sale, lease, financing, easements, options, and development could be executed by the designated managing member, Grant Mercer. There it was. Not hidden exactly. Just buried in language most spouses would never question because the person explaining it was sitting across the kitchen from them wearing a wedding ring. "Why are you the managing member?" I asked. Grant didn't hesitate. "Because I deal with contracts all day. It takes the administrative burden off you." "And what does that let you do?" His expression remained easy. "Routine management, nothing significant without talking to you." That wasn't what the page said. I let my eyes move slowly over the paragraph. "Could you sell it?" "No." A lie. "Borrow against it?" "Not without us discussing it." Another carefully shaped lie. "Sign something with a developer?" For the first time, I saw a tiny change in his face, barely there. "Why would you ask that?" I shrugged. "You keep mentioning development." "Only as an example," he smiled. "Nat, if this feels too fast, we stop." That was Grant at his best. He never pushed at the moment resistance appeared. He stepped back so I would feel safe moving forward. I closed the agreement. "No, I want to understand it. Maybe we should have someone explain everything in person." He studied me. "Like who?" "The attorney, maybe a tax person, whoever you think makes sense." I paused, then added exactly what I knew he wanted to hear. "If I'm going to do this, I'd rather sit down once, ask all my questions, and get it done." Something lit behind his eyes. Victory, quickly hidden beneath concern. "That's reasonable." "Could we do it at the farmhouse?" I asked. "Grandma's place?" "Yes, if we're talking about the land, I'd rather be there." Grant smiled and reached for my hand. "Whatever makes you comfortable." I squeezed his fingers. "Bring whoever you think I need to meet." He nodded slowly. "I might know a property consultant who can explain the development side without making it overwhelming." I knew the name before he said it. "Her name is Vanessa Cole." For one dangerous second, every sound in the kitchen disappeared. 13 months of photographs, the email about my grandmother, the hotel in Louisville, his hand on her back, all of it passed through me at once. I kept my face still. "Vanessa?" I repeated like I had never heard the name before. "She's good?" Grant smiled. "Very." I smiled back. "Then I'd love to meet her." He thought he had finally brought the last piece of his plan into place. What he didn't understand was that I had just invited his mistress to sit across from me at my grandmother's table and explain how she planned to take my land. By breakfast the next morning, Grant was already talking about the meeting as if the whole thing had been his idea. That was almost funny to me. The night before, I had suggested bringing everyone together at the farmhouse. I had asked for an attorney. I had opened the door wide enough for him to walk through. But once Grant saw a path he liked, he had a way of stepping into the center of it and forgetting who had pointed it out. "Vanessa can do Sunday," he said, scrolling through his phone while I poured coffee. "She thinks it would be useful to walk the property first, then sit down with the documents." I carried my mug to the table. Sounds reasonable. Derek might come too. Who's Derek? A corporate attorney. He handles some real estate structures. I lifted an eyebrow. I thought the attorney who drafted the sample paperwork was just someone doing you a favor. Grant paused for half a second. Different attorney. Derek's more experienced with property transactions. I nodded like that answer settled everything. Before Chattanooga, it probably would have. That was one of the biggest differences between the woman I had been and the woman sitting at that table now. I no longer helped Grant make his explanations believable. I simply listened to them. "Sunday at 2:30?" he asked. "Works for me." He smiled. "Good. And Nat, I don't want you feeling like you have to sign anything that day." I took a slow sip of coffee. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." "I know," I smiled back. He relaxed. The thing about manipulation is that the person doing it often needs to believe they are still a good person. Grant did not see himself as someone forcing his wife into a bad deal. He saw himself as guiding me towards something I would eventually understand. That story mattered to him. It allowed him to lie without feeling like a liar. If he could convince himself the land would make us richer, then maybe the affair, the secret appraisal, the consulting fee, the hidden company, all of it could be filed under complicated instead of what it really was. I had stopped needing him to admit the difference. I only needed him to keep underestimating me. At lunch, I called Eleanor from my car behind the clinic. "Sunday, 2:30, farmhouse." "Who's coming?" "Grant, Vanessa Cole, and a corporate attorney named Derek Shaw." "You're sure about Shaw?" "Grant gave me the name this morning." I heard paper move on Eleanor's end. "I know his firm. Transactional work, commercial property, LLCs, acquisitions." "So he's not there to explain family estate planning?" "Not primarily." That answer didn't surprise me. By then, surprises had become confirmations. "I want you there," I said. "I was planning to be." "Bring everything." "The trust?" "Certified copies." "County recordings?" "Yes." "Independent appraisal?" I looked toward the clinic entrance, where one of my patients was being helped from a car by her daughter. "Yes, I want them to see the number." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Natalie, once you show Grant the trust, he'll know the land deal is dead." "I know. And once he knows that, the rest of the meeting changes. That's why I don't want you opening with it." "You want him to present first?" "I want Grant to explain in his own words why he thinks I should sign." Eleanor understood. "Let him build the record?" "Exactly." It sounded cold when spoken that way. A record, a meeting, documents. But there was emotion underneath every page. I just wasn't going to let emotion choose the order anymore. After Eleanor, I called Marcus. He answered immediately. "I was expecting you." "Why?" "Vanessa's been active this morning." "Meaning?" "Cumberland Ridge had new internal filing activity connected to the corridor project. Nothing final, but the timing is interesting." "How interesting?" "Interesting enough that I'd say Sunday matters to them." I stared through the windshield. "Then I need the full package ready. Already working on it. Not just the land deal." Marcus paused. "You want the personal side too?" "Everything." "Photos?" "Yes." "Hotel records?" "Yes." "Emails?" "Every one you can document." "Consulting agreement?" "Especially that." He was silent for a second. "Are you planning to show Grant all of it?" "If he gives me a reason." "Natalie, I think you passed that point weeks ago." I almost laughed. "Probably." "Do you want me at the farmhouse from the beginning?" "No." "Why not?" "Because Vanessa knows what investigators look like." "That sounds insulting." "You know what I mean." "I do." "Stay close. Eleanor will text when I'm ready." Marcus exhaled slowly. "You want them comfortable first." "I want them to believe they still understand the room." That night, Grant became almost affectionate. Not dramatically. That would have made me suspicious even before all this. He simply returned to an older version of himself. He picked up dinner from the little Italian place I liked. He poured me wine. He sat across from me and asked about a patient I had mentioned the week before. He remembered her name. That hurt more than I wanted it to. I had started wishing he would become easier to hate, crueler, colder, careless, something simple. Instead, he still knew which takeout I preferred and which patient had been worrying me. Betrayal would be easier if the person betraying you stopped being recognizable. Grant never gave me that gift. Halfway through dinner, he opened his laptop. I ran some rough numbers. For the land? Just possibilities. The spreadsheet showed potential lease income, conservation arrangements, and modest development scenarios. None of the numbers came close to the $9.85 million Cumberland expected the property could be worth. "You really think the property could generate that much?" I asked. "Maybe. Has anybody formally valued it?" Grant looked at the screen instead of me. "Not formally." "Nobody?" "I've had conversations." "With Vanessa?" The question came out naturally enough that he didn't react at first. "She knows the market." "Has she seen the property before?" That time he hesitated. "From maps, probably." "Probably?" He smiled. "Nat, consultants look at parcels all day. I don't know exactly what she's reviewed." I nodded. One more lie placed carefully beside all the others. He closed the laptop and covered my hand with his. "You're doing the right thing by learning about this." I looked at his hand over mine. There had been a time when that touch meant safety. Now it felt like evidence. "I'm starting to think so too," I said. Saturday morning, I drove to the farmhouse alone. The weather had turned cold overnight, and dry leaves skittered across the gravel when I pulled in. I unlocked the side door and stood inside Grandma's kitchen for a long moment. The farmhouse always had a particular silence when nobody had been there for a few days. Not emptiness, more like waiting. I opened the curtains, turned up the heat, and carried cleaning supplies into the dining room. Grandma's oak table stood exactly where it always had, heavy, scarred, honest. I ran my hand across the corner where Grandpa had once dropped a toolbox and left a deep dent. Nobody had ever repaired it. Grandma said furniture was supposed to remember the people who used it. On Sunday, that table would hold Grant's LLC agreement, Vanessa's presentation, Derek's legal language, Eleanor's trust records, and eventually Marcus's folder. I started arranging chairs, one for me at the head, one for Grant, Vanessa, Derek, Eleanor. Then I placed a sixth chair slightly away from the table, Marcus's chair. I stood there afterward looking at them all. It struck me that Grant believed Sunday was about convincing me to sign paperwork. Vanessa believed it was about securing access to a valuable parcel. Derek probably believed it was another transaction. Only I knew it was something else entirely. It was the first time all the lies were going to be asked to sit in the same room. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning because I needed something physical to do. I dusted shelves, swept the porch, wiped down the kitchen counters. At one point, I found an old photograph of Grandma holding a basket of peaches near the orchard. I sat on the floor beside the cabinet and looked at it longer than I meant to. She was probably 60 in the picture, hair tied back, squinting into the sun. When she left me that property, she did not tell me to make the most money possible from it. She told me to make good decisions. There is a difference, and it took almost losing control of the land for me to understand how important that difference was. Sunday morning, Eleanor called at 8:12. "Updated appraisal is in." I stepped onto my back porch so Grant wouldn't hear. "How much?" $10.7 million. Even knowing the earlier estimates, the number still made me grip the railing. That's current? Based on market conditions, corridor access, and the development potential everyone seems so interested in. It could vary, but 10.7 is defensible. Bring it. "Natalie, are you okay?" I looked through the glass door at Grant moving around our kitchen, making eggs like it was any other Sunday. "I will be." When I went back inside, he turned from the stove. "Who was that?" "Eleanor." His hand stopped for just a second. "Eleanor Price?" "Yes." "Why are you talking to her this early?" "Because she's coming this afternoon." Grant stared at me. "To the meeting?" "You're bringing an attorney. I thought I should bring mine." The reaction was small, but I knew him too well to miss it. His thumb rubbed against the side of his index finger. Irritation, stress. Something had moved outside his plan. Then he smiled. "Of course, that's actually smart." I almost admired the recovery. "Glad you think so." He slid eggs onto a plate and changed the subject. By noon, Marcus texted me one photograph, The thick black folder was sitting on his desk. Ready when you are. At 1:35, I arrived at the farmhouse and made coffee. Grant pulled into the drive 17 minutes later, carrying his laptop bag and 2 document cases. He walked inside, kissed my cheek, and looked around the dining room. "You really cleaned up." "I had time." He set his things on the table. "Big day." "I guess so." Grant looked toward the window at the fields beyond the farmhouse. "Your grandma would probably be happy you're finally organizing this." I turned slowly. Even now he was using her. Maybe by then it had become habit. Maybe he no longer heard what he was doing. "Maybe," I said. At 2:17, tires crunched over the gravel outside. A black SUV stopped beside Grant's. Vanessa stepped out first. Camel coat, leather portfolio, controlled smile. Derek Shaw came around the passenger side carrying a slim briefcase. Grant moved toward the door before I did. He looked almost relieved to see them. That told me everything. Vanessa stepped inside and offered me her hand. "Natalie, it's so nice to finally meet you. Grant has told me so much about you." I looked at her face and thought about Louisville, Atlanta, Nashville, Grandma Evelyn's name inside her acquisition notes, and the sentence she had written about using my family history to overcome my resistance. I took her hand anyway. "I'm sure he has." Vanessa smiled, not hearing the meaning underneath it. Then she looked around the farmhouse and said softly, "This place is beautiful. You can really feel the family history here." For 1 second, the anger rose so fast I could taste it. Then I let it pass. She was still performing the strategy she thought would work. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Vanessa walked into my grandmother's farmhouse like she had been there before. Not literally, of course, but there was no hesitation in the way she moved through the entryway, no awkwardness, no sense that she was stepping into somebody else's history. She looked around once, slowly, taking in the old photographs, the oak floors, the narrow hallway, then smiled at me with a softness I might have believed 6 months earlier. "Grant was right," she said. "This place has so much character." I almost laughed. Character, family history, preservation. She was already using the words from her own notes. "It does," I said. Derek Shaw came in behind her, polite and careful, carrying a slim briefcase that looked expensive without trying to. Grant took Vanessa's coat before I could. That small gesture landed harder than I expected, not because it was intimate, because it was familiar. He knew how she liked to be received. He knew where to place her things. There are moments when betrayal becomes visible in details so small nobody else in the room would notice them. "Coffee?" I asked. Vanessa smiled. "Please." Derek declined. Grant said, "You know how I take mine." I looked at him. "I do. 2 sugars, no cream." 19 years condensed into something that suddenly felt less like intimacy and more like a habit I had memorized for someone who no longer deserved it. I poured his cup anyway. We moved into the dining room. I took Grandma's old chair at the head of the table. Vanessa sat to Grant's right. Derek sat across from her. Grant opened his laptop and placed one of his document cases beside it. I left the chair beside me empty. Eleanor would fill it soon. Vanessa rested her hands lightly on the table. "Before we get into paperwork, I'd love to understand what matters most to you about the property." I almost admired how quickly she went to work. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Long term. Is keeping it intact important? Do you want it to stay in the family? Are you concerned about development changing the character of the land?" Every question had already been answered in the emails Marcus showed me. She wasn't learning about me. She was confirming the profile. "Keeping it in the family matters," I said. Vanessa nodded with exactly the right amount of sympathy. "That makes sense, and that's really why the structure Grant mentioned can be useful. It gives you flexibility without forcing you to make any immediate decisions." Grant leaned in. "That's what I've been trying to explain." "What kind of flexibility?" I asked. Vanessa kept her voice gentle. "Leasing, access arrangements, future transfers, maybe development someday if you ever wanted it. The point is, you'd have options." "And I wouldn't have to sell." "Absolutely not." Grant smiled at me. "Nothing happens unless it makes sense for us." Us. I had heard that word so many times by then that it had stopped meaning partnership. It meant access. Derek opened his briefcase and took out a draft agreement. "This is just a working version," he said, "nothing final." He slid it toward me. I looked down at the first page. Mercer Family Holdings, LLC. My name appeared first. Grant second. 51% to me, 49% to him. Neat. Reassuring. Designed to make me feel like I still controlled everything. I turned a few pages slowly, though I already knew the language. "So I keep the majority." "Correct," Derek said. "And Grant handles management. Day-to-day matters," Grant added quickly. I looked at him. "What does that mean in real life?" "Contracts, administrative stuff, anything involving outside parties." "Like a developer?" The room changed, only slightly. Vanessa's eyes moved to Grant. Derek looked down at the agreement. Grant gave me a small smile. "Potentially, but nobody is talking about selling anything today." "I didn't ask about selling." "I know. I asked about a developer." Grant leaned back. "There are always developers looking at land around Franklin." "Looking at mine?" Vanessa answered before he could. "There has been general interest in that corridor." "General?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I smiled. "I'm not worried." That was true. For the first time since Chattanooga, I wasn't afraid of what they knew. I was waiting to see how much they would admit. The front door opened a minute later. Eleanor's voice carried from the hallway. "Natalie? In here." She stepped into the dining room carrying a dark leather portfolio and wearing the same calm expression she wore the day she told me my property could be protected. Grant's face changed immediately. He recovered fast, but not fast enough for me to miss it. "Eleanor," he said. "Grant." That was all she gave him. I introduced Vanessa and Derek. Eleanor shook both hands, then sat beside me. "I brought the current property records," she said. "Just so everyone is working from the same facts." Grant's thumb began rubbing against the side of his index finger beneath the table. Irritation, stress, a crack in the confidence. "Current records?" he asked. I looked at Eleanor. "Let's hear their proposal first." Vanessa smiled again, but something in it had tightened. She knew the room had changed. Skilled people sense control slipping long before they admit it. "Of course," she said. Derek began walking us through the basic structure. I let him talk. I didn't interrupt every paragraph. I didn't need to. The details mattered legally, but emotionally the situation was much simpler. They wanted me to place the land into a new structure where Grant would have enough management authority to open doors I had never agreed to open. That was all the audience needed to understand, and it was all I needed to hear them explain. When Derek finished, I asked, "So if I sign this today, Grant gets the ability to negotiate certain arrangements involving the property?" Derek chose his words carefully. "Within the authority granted by the operating agreement." "That sounds like yes," Grant cut in. "Natalie, nothing significant would happen without us talking about it first." "Then why not put that in writing?" Silence. Grant's jaw tightened. "We can." "Good." I turned to Vanessa. "And you said there's interest in the corridor?" "Yes." "How much interest?" "Developers look at land all the time." That wasn't my question. Her expression stayed pleasant, but the warmth had thinned. "There are parties evaluating opportunities." "On my property?" "Potentially." "For how much?" Grant looked at me sharply. "Nat, this meeting isn't about throwing numbers around." I turned toward him. "Why not?" "Because value depends on a lot of variables." "So you don't know what it's worth?" His eyes held mine. "Not exactly." Another almost truth. "Has anyone appraised it?" I asked. Grant hesitated. "Not formally." I let that answer sit there. Vanessa's fingers moved once against the edge of her portfolio. Derek looked toward Eleanor. I felt the balance of the room shifting one question at a time. "Interesting," I said, "because I have." Grant's face went still. Eleanor opened her portfolio and removed the sealed appraisal. She placed it in front of me. Nobody spoke. Outside, wind moved across the bare branches near the orchard, and the old house gave one of its familiar soft creaks. I rested my hand on the envelope. "Before we talk about what I should sign," I said, "I think we should all be honest about what this land is actually worth." Grant looked at the envelope, then at me. "When did you get that?" "Recently." "Why didn't you tell me?" I almost smiled. There are moments when hypocrisy becomes so perfect it stops being infuriating and becomes almost elegant. I didn't realize I was required to tell you every conversation I had about my property. Vanessa looked down. Derek pretended to organize a page. Grant stared at me, and for the first time I saw something new in his face. Not anger, not yet. Suspicion. The possibility that maybe his wife had been moving through these past weeks with more information than he understood. I did not open the appraisal. Not yet. I wanted him to sit inside that uncertainty a little longer. "Before I show you the number," I said, "I want one thing clear." Derek looked up. Vanessa stopped moving. Grant's eyes narrowed. "What?" he asked. I slid his draft agreement back across the table. "Tell me exactly what happens to my control of this land if I sign that." Nobody answered right away, and for the first time since Grant started talking about my property months earlier, the silence belonged to me. Nobody answered me right away. Grant looked at Derek. Derek looked at the agreement. Vanessa looked at me. Eleanor simply waited. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. For months, Grant had built this entire plan around the assumption that I would sign before I understood what the signature actually changed. Now that I had asked the question plainly, nobody seemed eager to give me the plain answer. Derek finally adjusted the papers in front of him. "The property would be contributed to Mercer Family Holdings," he said. "You would retain the majority interest." 51%. Correct. "And Grant would be managing member?" "Under this draft, yes." I looked at Grant. "Which means what?" He leaned forward, already wearing the patient expression he used whenever he wanted me to feel like I was overcomplicating something simple. "It means I handle the administrative side, contracts, negotiations, routine decisions. You still own the majority, but you would be the person authorized to act for the company." Derek answered this time, "Within defined limits." "Could he negotiate with a developer?" A pause. "Potentially." "Could he sign an option agreement?" Derek glanced at Grant before answering. "Depending on the final language." I sat back. "So the answer is yes?" Grant exhaled. "Nat, you're making this sound like I could wake up tomorrow and sell the farm without telling you." "Could you?" "No." Eleanor spoke quietly beside me. "The current draft gives Grant considerably more authority than Natalie was led to believe." Grant turned toward her. "That's your interpretation." "It's the document." There was nothing dramatic in Eleanor's voice, which somehow made the words hit harder. Grant hated calm opposition. He knew how to push against anger. Calm gave him nothing to push against. "We can change the language," he said. "Fine." I slid the agreement toward him. "Then we don't need this one." His forehead tightened. "What do you mean?" I looked at Eleanor. She opened her portfolio and removed a thick packet of stamped documents. Grant's eyes followed the papers as she placed them on Grandma's table. I could almost see him trying to identify them from across the room. 7 weeks ago," I said, "I changed how the Harper property is held." Grant's face went blank. "You did what?" "The land is already protected." Vanessa stopped moving. Derek leaned closer. I continued. "It's held through a separate property trust with a landholding LLC underneath it. I am the controlling party. There is no automatic spousal interest, no management authority transferred through marriage, and no third party can negotiate, mortgage, option, or sell the property without my direct authorization and independent legal review." Grant stared at me like I had switched languages. "When did you do this?" 7 weeks ago." "Without telling me?" The outrage in his voice was so genuine that for 1 second I almost admired it. A man who had spent months hiding appraisals, developers, contracts, and another woman from me was suddenly offended by secrecy. "Yes. We're married, Natalie." "I know." "You restructured a multi-million-dollar asset behind my back." Interesting choice of words. His face hardened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm surprised secrecy bothers you this much." Vanessa stepped in before Grant could answer. "Natalie, I think everyone here wants the same thing, protecting the property." I turned toward her. "Then you should be happy." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's protected." I placed my hand on the trust documents. "That was the goal, wasn't it?" Vanessa gave me a tight smile. "Protection is one goal. Flexibility is another. Flexibility for whom? She didn't answer. Derek had already begun reviewing Eleanor's summary. He turned 2 pages, then looked at her. "These filings are complete?" "Recorded with the county," Eleanor said. "And the land-holding entity is entirely controlled through the trust?" "Correct." Derek leaned back. I watched Grant look at him. That was the moment Grant realized the attorney he had brought was not going to rescue the deal. "So what?" Grant said. "She can amend it." "Natalie can make changes where the trust permits," Eleanor said. "You cannot." "Nobody said I could." "Your proposed LLC requires her to transfer the land out of a structure she already created specifically to prevent the authority your draft gives you." That landed hard. Grant's jaw tightened. "You're making it sound malicious." I looked directly at him. "Then explain why I needed to be protected from it." He turned toward me. "You didn't." "Then why didn't you tell me what the managing member language really meant?" "I did." "No, you told me nothing meaningful would change." "Because nothing meaningful would have changed unless we decided to do something." "We?" I asked. "Or you?" His face flushed. "There you go again." "Again? Turning this into some kind of power struggle." I almost laughed. "Grant, you wrote yourself the power." Silence. I reached for the sealed appraisal, and you did it while knowing something else I didn't. I opened the envelope and removed the report. The number sat on the first page in clean black print, $10,700,000. I placed it where everyone could see. Vanessa's eyes went to it immediately. Derek looked next. Grant barely glanced down. That was how I knew he had already seen numbers close to it. $10.7 million, I said. Independent valuation. Grant rubbed the side of his mouth. "That's just an estimate." "Of course. It could be lower. Could be higher, too, according to the report." "Natalie, appraisals like this depend on development assumptions." "Exactly." I held his gaze. "Development assumptions you somehow knew about months before I did." He looked away. I felt something settle inside me. There it was. Not proof yet, but recognition. He knew the number. He knew the conditions behind it. "You told me you had only casual conversations," I said. "I did." "Casual enough to know commercial access could push the value over $11 million? Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. Grant looked at her, then back at me. "Who have you been talking to?" There it was again. Not denial, concern about my information. "Why?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. You've obviously been running around investigating all of this." "I've been learning what I own." "From who?" "Professionals." Grant laughed once, bitterly. "So now you trust strangers more than your husband." That sentence might have hurt me once. Now it only revealed how badly he still misunderstood the situation. "Strangers showed me the paperwork." He looked at me for a long second. "What exactly do you think I've done?" "I think you tried to put my land into a structure that would give you management authority." "Because I know contracts." "I think you knew the land was worth almost 10 times what I believed." "I knew it had upside." "You never told me." "Because I didn't want you getting overwhelmed by speculative numbers." Overwhelmed. Another word for emotional. Another word designed to make withholding information sound protective. I nodded slowly. "And Cumberland Ridge?" The room went still. Vanessa's face changed first. Not much, but enough. Derek looked at her. Grant's head turned toward me. "What did you say?" "Cumberland Ridge Holdings." I said the name carefully. "Should I know them?" Grant's eyes narrowed. "They're a developer." "One of several?" Vanessa answered quickly. "Yes." I looked at her. "Several developers who just happen to need my 31 acres for access?" Her expression tightened. "I don't know what you've been told." "That makes 2 of us. I didn't know what I was being told for months." Grant pushed back from the table slightly. "Natalie, this is ridiculous. Nobody has signed anything with Cumberland." "I didn't say anyone had." His eyes flickered. He had answered a question I hadn't asked. Eleanor noticed too. I could tell. So could Derek. I rested both hands on the table. Here's what I know for certain. The land is safe. Your LLC is irrelevant. I know what the property is worth, and I know Cumberland Ridge has been looking at it. Grant stared at me. The confidence he brought into the farmhouse was gone now. In its place was calculation. He was trying to figure out how much I knew and where the information stopped. That was exactly where I wanted him. Vanessa began closing one of her folders. Maybe we should pause and reschedule once everyone has had time to review the new structure. No, I said. She stopped. We're already here. Grant looked at me. What else is there to discuss? I turned toward Eleanor. She checked her phone and gave me a small nod. Marcus was outside. I looked back at my husband. The land was the easy part. His face went pale. What does that mean? I heard tires crunch softly over the gravel drive, then a car door close outside. I kept my eyes on Grant. It means you thought this meeting was about what I was willing to sign. Another car door closed. It isn't. A knock sounded from the front of the farmhouse. It's about what you already did. The knock came 3 seconds later. Nobody at the table moved. Grant looked toward the hallway, then back at me, and I watched the confusion on his face deepen into something closer to fear. That was the first moment all afternoon when he stopped trying to manage me and started wondering what I had already managed without him. Eleanor rose, crossed the room, and opened the front door. Marcus Reed stepped inside carrying the thick black folder I had seen in his text the day before. He wore a dark jacket, no tie, and the expression of a man arriving at a meeting he had already understood long before anyone else in the room. Grant stood halfway out of his chair. Who is that? I didn't answer immediately. Marcus came into the dining room and placed the folder beside me. Marcus Reed, he said, Financial Investigations. Vanessa's face changed before Grant's did. She recognized the danger instantly. Derek looked from Marcus to the closed folder, then quietly moved his legal pad closer to himself. Natalie, Grant said, what the hell is this? I looked at him. The part you thought I'd never find. Grant gave a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. Find what? You're acting like there's some conspiracy. Then this should be easy. I opened the folder. The first document I took out was the organizational filing for Cumberland Ridge Holdings. I placed it in front of Grant. You know this company? He barely glanced at it. I know of them. You told me a minute ago you'd never negotiated anything with Cumberland on my behalf. I haven't. That was a very carefully chosen sentence. His mouth tightened. Because it's true. I slid the project map beside the filing. My grandmother's 31 acres were highlighted in yellow, connecting 2 larger development sections. Their development plan doesn't work cleanly without my property. Vanessa leaned forward. Natalie, corridor planning documents are not evidence of wrongdoing. Developers evaluate parcels all the time. I know. I turned to her. That's why I brought more. The next document was the consulting agreement, Mercer Development Advisory. The company Grant claimed did not exist because he had never once mentioned it to me. I pushed it across the table until it stopped directly in front of him. What is Mercer Development Advisory? He didn't touch the paper. It's a consulting entity. Whose? Mine. Finally, one small truth after months of lies. When did you form it? A few months ago. 4 months ago, Marcus said. Grant shot him a look. Marcus didn't react. I tapped the compensation section. And what happens if Cumberland closes on my parcel? Grant stared at the page. That agreement is preliminary. $1,350,000, I said. The number felt different spoken out loud in my grandmother's dining room. Dirtier somehow. That's what your company gets after closing. Grant leaned back. That's not money for taking your land. It's a consulting fee tied to a larger development project. A larger project that requires my land. Potentially. And I was supposed to transfer my land into an LLC where you became managing member. Natalie, we've already been through this. No, Grant, you've been through the version where I didn't know what you were being paid. His face hardened. You're twisting business into something personal. I almost smiled. You made it personal when the business required your wife not knowing what her property was worth. Vanessa stepped in. That is not a fair characterization. I looked at her. You really want to do this? For the first time, she didn't answer immediately. I reached into the folder and placed several printed emails in front of her. The top page carried the sentence I had memorized weeks earlier. If Natalie gets emotional about the family history, keep positioning the LLC as preservation. She needs to believe the structure protects Evelyn's legacy. Vanessa looked at it and went completely still. Grant's eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at her. Where did this come from? Marcus answered, business records connected to the transaction. Grant turned on me. You hired someone to investigate me? Yes. Your own husband? You hired people to evaluate my land without telling me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I picked up another page. Strong sentimental attachment. Resistant to direct sale discussion. Spouse has established influence. I read the words slowly. That's how you described me. Vanessa's professional expression finally cracked. Natalie, those are acquisition notes. They're not personal judgments. My grandmother's name is in them. Silence. My childhood stories are in them. Grant looked down. That was the moment the room stopped being about money for me. I had expected anger when I confronted him. What came instead was grief. Not loud grief, something quieter. The kind you feel when you realize a person didn't simply betray you. They studied the parts of you they were trusted to protect and converted them into leverage. You told her about Grandma, I said to Grant. His voice dropped. Nat, you told her how I felt about this place. You told her I'd resist selling because of my mother, my grandfather, Evelyn. Then the two of you decided the way around that was to make me think I was protecting them. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. He rubbed both hands over his face. I saw an opportunity, a huge opportunity. I knew you'd shut down if anyone led with development. I thought if we got the structure in place first, you'd eventually understand what the property could do for us. For us, I tapped the $1.35 million fee. Interesting definition of us. Grant's voice rose. We're married. Anything I make benefits our life. Does Vanessa benefit too? The question hit the room like a glass breaking. Derek looked up sharply. Vanessa's eyes locked on mine. Grant froze. I reached for the photographs. I didn't throw them. I didn't need drama anymore. I placed them one by one across the oak table. Nashville, Louisville, Atlanta, the Gulch. Grant's hand on Vanessa's back. Grant kissing her beside the car. Grant carrying the overnight bag I had given him for Christmas. 13 months, I said. Grant went pale. Vanessa looked away. Natalie, he whispered. I put down the final photograph. You told me Louisville was a conference. It was. You told me Atlanta ran late because of a client. There was a client meeting. And after that meeting, you went back to a hotel with her. His jaw worked, but no words came. How long? I asked. He glanced at Vanessa. That told me more than any answer could have. How long, Grant? It's complicated. There are phrases people use when the truth is simple, but admitting it would make them look exactly like who they are. Complicated is one of them. I nodded toward Vanessa. Should I ask her? Don't do this. Do what? Find out what my husband has been doing for 13 months? We can talk privately. I laughed once, softly. You lost the right to privacy when you brought your mistress into my grandmother's house to help me sign away control of $10 million in land. Vanessa stood. I think I should leave. Sit down. My voice wasn't loud, but she stopped. You came here because you believed I didn't understand what was happening. You can stay long enough to understand what happens next. I reached into Eleanor's portfolio and removed the last document. Grant saw the heading before I slid it toward him. Petition for divorce. The color left his face completely. Natalie. Filed Friday. He stared at me. You filed for divorce before this meeting? How could you do? So all of this was what, a setup? I looked at the papers spread across Grandma's table, his secret company, the consulting agreement, Vanessa's emails, the photographs. No, Grant, the setup was what you spent months doing to me. This was documentation. He sat there silently. Vanessa gathered her purse and coat without another word. Derek closed his case, stood, and told Grant quietly that he would not be participating in any further discussion without clarification of his representation. Smart man. Marcus stepped aside as Vanessa walked toward the hall. Before she reached the door, I said her name. She turned. You wrote that I needed to believe this structure protected Evelyn's legacy. Vanessa said nothing. You were right about one thing. I was going to protect it. I looked at Grant. You just misunderstood who I needed to protect it from. Vanessa left. Derek followed shortly after. Marcus gave Eleanor a nod, gathered copies of the evidence, and stepped outside to give us privacy. Then it was only Grant, Eleanor, and me. Grant stared at the divorce petition for a long time. Finally, he asked, "When did you know?" I thought about Chattanooga, the balcony, 2 glasses of wine, his voice through the glass. Our anniversary. His eyes closed. You heard me. Every word that mattered. He opened them again. And you came home with me and said nothing. I needed to know who you were when you thought I knew nothing. That landed harder than anything else had. He looked down at his wedding ring. For 19 years, I had believed knowing someone meant knowing what they would never do to you. I understand it differently now. Sometimes you don't truly know a person until they believe there will be no consequences for what they choose. Grant had spent months thinking my trust made me easy to control. Sitting there in the silence of my grandmother's house, surrounded by every secret he thought belonged only to him, he finally understood the truth. I had trusted him. That had never meant I was helpless. 3 months after that Sunday at my grandmother's farmhouse, Grant moved the last of his things out of our house. Not everything at once. Real endings rarely happen with one dramatic slam of a door. First came the suits he needed for work, then the golf clubs, then the boxes from the garage. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, he returned for the framed photograph of his parents that had sat on our bookshelf for 17 years. I stood in the hallway while he wrapped it in an old towel because neither of us seemed to know what else to say. By then, the anger had burned down into something quieter. Not forgiveness, not even peace yet, just exhaustion. There is a point after betrayal when you stop wanting explanations, because every new explanation is simply another way of asking you to carry part of what someone else chose to do. Grant had explanations for everything. The affair with Vanessa started during a difficult period. The land deal was an opportunity he thought I would eventually appreciate. The LLC was poorly communicated. The $1.35 million consulting fee was industry standard. I listened to those phrases during mediation and thought about how language can be used to make ugly things sound administrative. Nobody says, "I planned to profit from my wife's ignorance." They say, "I was exploring options." Nothing says, "I lied to you for 13 months." They say, "Our marriage had been disconnected." People often soften the words when they cannot soften what they did. Eleanor never let me get lost in that. She kept returning to documents, dates, ownership, signatures, facts. The Harper property had been inherited by me. Grant had never been added to the deed. The trust and landholding structure were valid. No transfer had occurred. No option agreement had been signed. Cumberland Ridge had no enforceable interest in the 31 acres. In other words, despite all the planning behind my back, Grant had never gotten the one thing he needed most, my consent. That mattered more than revenge ever could. Cumberland withdrew from the proposed arrangement within weeks of discovering the property was unavailable under the structure they had expected. Their larger development project did not disappear entirely, but the clean access route through my acreage disappeared with it. Marcus later told me they began looking at alternatives farther east, more expensive and less convenient. Grant's consulting agreement went with the original deal. No closing meant no $1.35 million payment. I wish I could tell you I felt some great rush of satisfaction when Eleanor confirmed that. I didn't. Money had already cost enough. Vanessa disappeared from my life almost immediately. She did not call me. She did not apologize. According to what Marcus could verify, her professional relationship with Cumberland cooled after the failed acquisition, and whatever relationship she had with Grant apparently did not survive much longer either. I heard through someone Grant worked with that Vanessa had moved on to another project by February. That seemed fitting. People who build relationships around usefulness sometimes discover there isn't much left when the usefulness ends. Grant never told me exactly how they broke apart, and for once I did not ask. There had been a time when knowing every detail would have felt necessary. By then I understood something simpler. Not every unanswered question deserves permanent space in your life. Some doors do not need to be opened just because you know there is something behind them. The divorce itself was not cinematic. No courtroom confession, no judge pounding a gavel while Grant stared at the floor. Mostly it was emails, financial disclosures, meetings, signatures, and long stretches of waiting. The emotional parts of life often end inside very boring paperwork. We divided what had actually belonged to both of us: accounts, furniture, cars, retirement interests. Grant argued about a few things and surrendered others faster than I expected. He never seriously challenged the Harperland after Eleanor made the structure clear. I think part of him finally understood that doing so would only invite deeper examination of how he had tried to position the deal. The farmhouse stayed mine. The barn stayed mine. Every acre stayed where Grandma had put it. The first morning after the divorce became final, I drove there before sunrise. It was early spring, cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out of the car. The orchard had been neglected for years, but a few old peach trees still stood stubbornly near the south fence. I walked through wet grass carrying Grandma's blue coffee mug, the one I had found upside down beside her sink after she died. I had started using it again. For years I kept it safely in a cabinet because I was afraid of breaking it. That morning I realized there was something strange about protecting an object so carefully that you stopped letting it serve the purpose it had been made for. So I filled it with coffee and took it outside. I stood near the barn while the sky slowly changed from gray to pale gold. $10.7 million. That was the number on Eleanor's appraisal. Sometimes even now I have to laugh when I say it. I had spent years thinking of myself as a woman with a decent salary and an old family property that required too much maintenance. Grant thought that ignorance made me foolish. Maybe in one narrow sense, he was right. I should have known more about what I owned. I should have ordered an appraisal years earlier. I should have understood the legal structure before somebody else took an interest in it. But ignorance of a price is not the same as ignorance of value. That was the part Grant never understood. I knew exactly what that land was worth long before any appraiser put a number on it. I knew what it cost my grandparents to keep it through bad years. I knew what my mother's wedding looked like beneath those maple trees. I knew how Grandma's hands looked after an afternoon in the orchard. I knew which floorboard near the pantry squeaked and which corner of the porch stayed dry during summer storms. Grant understood market value better than I did. He just assumed market value was the highest kind of value there was. I spent part of the settlement repairing the farmhouse. Nothing extravagant: new roof, electrical work, plumbing. The porch needed more boards replaced than I expected. I hired a local family to begin restoring a few acres of the old orchard, and when they asked if I wanted modern, high-yield varieties planted everywhere, I told them to leave several of Grandma's old trees exactly where they were. They might not produce much anymore, but not everything needs to justify the space it occupies by producing a profit. Some things earn their place by reminding you who you were before somebody tried to convince you to become easier to manage. I stayed at my job. People sometimes assume discovering you own something worth millions should immediately turn life into another kind of life. Maybe someday I will sell part of the acreage. Maybe I won't. I have learned not to make permanent decisions just because someone else believes money creates urgency. I still drive my Subaru. I still work with patients who celebrate taking 6 steps without help. That work feels more meaningful to me now, not less. Recovery is rarely about returning to exactly who you were before the injury. Sometimes the body heals by becoming different, stronger in places it never had to be strong before. I think people do the same thing. Grant called me once about 6 weeks after the divorce was final. I almost didn't answer, but I did. He sounded older. Maybe he was. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I stood at my kitchen window looking toward a dogwood tree beginning to bloom. "No." He was quiet. "I'm not sure if that makes me feel better." "It shouldn't." Another pause. "I did love you, Natalie." That sentence would have destroyed me months earlier. Instead, I believed him. That may sound impossible, but I think Grant did love me in the way he knew how. Love simply wasn't enough to stop him from choosing himself when enough money appeared. That is a harder truth than saying he never loved me at all. "I know," I said. "That's what made it worse." We never spoke again. These days, when I walk the property in the morning, I sometimes think about the woman I was before Chattanooga. I do not despise her for trusting her husband. I do not think she was weak. Trusting somebody who has given you 19 years of reasons to trust them is not stupidity. But once the truth appears, there comes a moment when you have to decide whether you will protect the history you had or the life you still have ahead of you. I chose what was ahead. And if you were in my place, what would you have done? Confronted him the moment you heard that phone call? Or stayed quiet until every lie was sitting on the table? If you have ever had someone mistake your trust for weakness, I would truly like to know how you handled it. I took another sip of coffee and looked across the 31 acres glowing in the early Tennessee light. Grant once whispered that I had no idea the land was worth millions. He was right. I didn't. But in the end, the land wasn't the most valuable thing I learned how to protect. I was.